It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. Well, this is going to be some kind of weekend in politics and in sports. The first World Cup match at MetLife, they have to call it New York, New Jersey Stadium for branding reasons. Something about they can't call it MetLife, I don't know. But the first World Cup match locally is tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. Morocco versus Brazil. That's a sports story, a global affairs story, and definitely a transportation story around here, right? Right after that, because it should be over by then, starting at 8:30, the Knicks could win the NBA championship tomorrow night, as if you didn't know. That game is in San Antonio, not at the Garden. But it's potentially a New York euphoria story, of course, and a safety in Midtown story after what happened on the streets on Wednesday night. Sunday is Flag Day and President Trump's 80th birthday. That has also become the occasion for a sporting event, if you count Ultimate Fighting as sports. Trump is making a UFC match, the first ever sporting event to take place at the White House on Sunday. I assume there'll be a prize for the winner and cake for the spectator-in-chief. And oh, by the way, voting begins tomorrow in the New York primary, and that's what we'll start with today. Later, we'll discuss Flag Day, UFC, Trump with Michael Shearer from The Atlantic. At the end of the show, we'll invite people from New Jersey, specifically New Jersey today, because that's where the games are, to say how you're helping to welcome fans from other countries who are taking hotel rooms and Airbnbs to watch their national teams. That'll be in our last 15 minutes this morning. People in New Jersey, in areas where people are coming to, maybe work in hospitality or whatever, will take your calls. But first, the New York primary. This is overwhelmingly a Democratic primary season in New York. That's where the really contested contests are, as you've been hearing, like in our various candidate forums and our Jerry Nadler district debate on TV and on the station and other places. We'll talk to two reporters covering the primaries who'll join us in a sec, but this is also our first informal, unofficial, thoroughly unscientific exit poll of this primary. Some of you may have already voted by mail. And here's our question. If you've made up your mind in any New York primary in the last 2 weeks, who did you decide to vote for and why? 212-433-WNYC. Again, if you've made up your mind in any New York primary in the last 2 weeks, who did you decide to vote for and why? We can also take questions you have for our guests if you're still undecided. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text. Dan Goldman or Brad Lander in that congressional primary in Brooklyn and Manhattan. Antonio Reynoso, Claire Valdez, or Julie Wan in that one in Brooklyn and Queens. Adriano Espaillat or Daria Liza Avila Chevalier in that one in Manhattan and the Bronx. How about among the four Democrats running to challenge Republican Congressman Mike Lawler north of the city, or the five we heard in our debate this week running to succeed Jerry Nadler in Manhattan? Is anyone paying attention to the New York State comptroller primary? We're going to talk about that in this segment. Or any of the state legislature ones, which we will also talk about some of. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. If you've made up your mind in any New York primary in the last 2 weeks, who did you decide to vote for and why? And we can also take any questions you have for our guests if you're still undecided. 212-433-WNYC, call or text 212-433-9692. And with us now are WNYC and Gothamist Albany reporter Jon Campbell and the New York State Bureau Chief for the news organization City and State, Rebecca Lewis. Hey, John. Hey, Rebecca. Happy World Cup, UFC Flag Day, New York Knicks high anticipation, and early voting weekend.
And the same to you, Brian.
Rebecca, do we have you? Maybe not yet. So listeners, there you are.
Oh, hello. Sorry. Apologies for that. Just want to say a very exciting time indeed.
Absolutely. Citing time not to be on mute. Okay, here's one example from our show of the national debate taking place within the Democratic Party about how far left the party should be going. We had Congressman Dan Goldman and his primary challenger, former comptroller Brad Lander, for a forum on the show. They agree on many things. It's, often the first thing we should say about some of these races. But symbolic of their different approaches, Lander had endorsed Zohran Mamdani in the mayoral race last year. Goldman did not. Lander said this in our forum.
I think it's significant that Representative Goldman, the Democratic congressman from the district, could not endorse the Democratic nominee for mayor, Zohran Mamdani, when he was running against Andrew Cuomo, a serial sexual harasser, in the general election.
Dan Goldman said this.
I made my position clear during the campaign, and as soon as the mayor won, I congratulated him, and I have been working with him since that very day. We share a lot of the same assessment of the problems here and the same goals.
John, is this a good example, representative of something larger than the one race, of a pretty progressive Democrat getting primary this year from the left?
Yeah, that certainly has been the case for the last few election cycles, and now that Zohran Mamdani won last year in the mayor's race, that is kind of on hyperdrive now. So you have seen Mayor Mamdani, endorse a slate of candidates, three congressional candidates, and a handful of state legislative candidates as well. And there's going to be a lot of question about his political muscle here. Polls show that he is popular in New York City, but certainly very popular among Democrats in New York City. He was able to mobilize young voters last year, and will his endorsement of Brad Lander and other candidates across the city help mobilize those voters for his endorsed candidates? That's one of the things that we're really going to be watching for. And yeah, I mean, it comes down to a lot of left candidates from the left end of the party running against more moderate candidates and in these primaries, and there's going to be a question of which side comes out on top.
Rebecca, if that Brooklyn and Manhattan district is in play, their biggest actual policy difference seems to be how early Goldman was willing to consider cutting off offensive military aid to Israel, really meaning how late, after the war in Gaza started following the October 7th Hamas attack in 2023. Would you say their difference in the mayoral endorsement category stemmed significantly from that?
I think that does have a pretty big role to play here in the race and in terms of the endorsement. I know that Goldman was a little bit unusual in that many Democrats who had previously perhaps endorsed Andrew Cuomo or chose to stay out of the mayoral race jumped onto the Mamdani bandwagon once he won the primary and he was the Democratic nominee. Goldman, whether by virtue of him personally or his district, chose not to do that. And I think that for a district like his that is very, very progressive, that it is something that is going to resonate with voters. And I think that ultimately, Goldman has done a lot, for example, on trying to be out front on immigration, going to 26 Federal Plaza. That's something that Brad Lander has tried to do as well. He just recently started his trial over his arrest at 26 Federal Plaza. So I think that this will be obviously a very big key difference that even Lander himself is getting hit for by those who are even further to the left, that he's not far enough to the left on this issue. But I think it is one of the big factors at play here and in the Mamdani factor as well.
Yeah. And John, if Goldman declined to endorse Mamdani despite Cuomo's flaws and unpopularity, he must have sensed that the district, as Rebecca was just alluding to, including many Jewish voters, but also others, were skeptical of Mamdani and the DSA as being too far to the left, maybe on Israel-Palestine, maybe also on raising taxes. Mamdani has returned the favor and endorsed Lander in this race. So would you say this race also has become any kind of referendum on Mamdani's first 6 months as mayor, or would that be going too far?
It might be going a little too far, but the Mamdani factor is very real. I mean, he is the most prominent Democratic politician in New York City at this moment. And, his endorsement carries weight, or at least these candidates who got the endorsement hope that. So, I think it might be going a little far to say it is a referendum on Mayor Mamdani. We did see him endorse in a city council special election recently, and his candidate, Lindsey Boylan, did not win. And I don't think that's necessarily viewed as a repudiation of Mayor Mamdani. So I think that, it is a major factor at play here. I think it would be going a little far to say that it's a referendum on the mayor's first, 6 months or so in office.
Here is an undecided voter in one of these races texting in. Let me just pull this up. Rebecca, I'll put this one to you. Listener writes, I am in Mike Lawler's district and was undecided when I listened to your candidates forum. My goal is to beat Lawler. I decided Kate Conley was the strongest given her military and governmental experience, working class background, and solid positions on affordability. You want to talk about that race a little bit? It's considered one of the biggest swing districts in the country, and our forum included 4 Democrats, 2 maybe a little more moderate, including Conley and Beth Davidson, and 2 who were more left.
Yeah. That is a...
sorry.
Rebecca, go ahead. Take this one.
That's a really interesting race, especially because it is one of Democrats' best pickup opportunities. But Mike Lawler is also one of the most uniquely talented Republicans, I think, in the state to hold on to this seat. He's got a history of flipping the district, flipping Democratic districts, and then holding on to seats. And Democrats have sort of struggled to put up a good candidate against him the past couple of years. So it's the Democratic primary is incredibly contentious for that very reason. I think that all the Democrats are trying to be very conscious about how they're running. I think that Kate Connolly has sort of emerged as, a good middle ground between, some more progressive candidates in the race and that background that can appeal to more conservative voters in the district or some of the more moderate Democrats. But it's a tough decision. Even Democrats in the district are not really on board with one candidate or the other. I think that there are those who have emerged, and I think that Kate Connolly is emerging as the one that Democrats are starting to favor. But there's been a lot of consternation about who Democrats should back. So this listener is certainly not alone in their taking time to decide who they want to back in this race, because it's certainly not cut and dry.
And here's another one from that district. Listener writes, I live in New York 17. I've decided to vote for Beth Davidson, although I love Effie's progressivism, and that refers to Effie Phillips Staley, progressive candidate in that race. Beth is my second choice, and I think she has a better chance of beating Mike Lawler, so she'll get my vote. And John, that's really interesting, right? So here's a voter, and how many voters over the many years in Democratic primaries have been struggling with this the way this candidate is. She likes, in this case, Effie Phillips Staley's progressivism more than Beth Davidson, but thinks Beth Davidson has the best chance of beating Lawler, and that's her deciding factor, this voter.
Yeah, and this is a district that, goes from northern Westchester through Rockland, Putnam counties. I mean, this is one that in theory is Democratic. It has 40% of active voters are Democratic. About a quarter are Republican, and a little more than a quarter are what we call blank voters, independent voters. But it has, it is a toss-up district in terms of how it comes out practically, how the results come out. So, Mike Lawler he won the district by 6 points in 2024. He, as Rebecca mentioned, I mean, he is In terms of political strategy and knowing that district inside out, Mike Lawler is at the top of that list. I mean, he is long been. I mean, he had a career as a political strategist and campaign manager before he himself got into politics. So there's a question about can the Democrats put on a unified front to defeat him in November after having this, five-way primary that has Democratic voters split one way or the other. Can they unify after this? Whoever wins, get behind that candidate to take out Mike Lawler? I mean, that is the big question here.
And here is Veronica in Manhattan, who apparently has recently made a decision in the 12th Congressional District. This is the five-way race to succeed Gerald Nadler, who's retiring. Hi, Veronica. You're on WNYC.
Thank you so much for taking my call. I decided to go with Schwalbe for several reasons. George
Schwalbe, Nina Schwalbe.
Yes, that's right. She struck me. She hit all the points. She has a globalist point of view, and this is a globalist city. We're a city of immigrants and internationals. She had a very strong take on what was happening with health, which is essential since we're having a major problem.
And that's her background. She's been a public health official for the UN and USAID.
These are good credentials. She also was fearless in saying what she wanted to say and bringing the issues to our district. The others, they were talking bigger issues without really getting into anything. I didn't like that Lasher missed 50% of the voting, or that Alex missed 70%. I think that Schlossberg can come along. He held his own, but she stood out to me, her experience and her fearlessness with disagreeing with the party and feeling that there needs to be a change, and I find that refreshing. We've had some wonderful people in this district, not discounting Jerry for the time I've lived here, but we've had good people, and there's a time for change. And if the Democratic Party did an autopsy and couldn't come up with a real answer why we lost in 24, we need to relook at some things.
It sounds like our debate was really what helped you make up your mind. Yeah?
Your debate was wonderful, and I'm no shining on you, but your questions were incredibly probing and quite necessary. I opened many of the questions that I had. I thank you for that.
And I thank you for that, Veronica. So, pulling back, John, you and Rebecca both have a pretty statewide view of the primaries. We just got that take from one voter who watched the debate and decided on the candidate who I think we can fairly characterize as the most to the left of the five running to succeed Gerald Nadler. Right after I read the text from the one in Lawler's district who would prefer the more progressive candidate, but is choosing somebody else because the listener thinks that person is more electable against Lawler. So would you say the Democratic congressional races fall into two basic categories? One's in safe Democratic districts like Nadler's, where the field would be more to the left, and one in places where the nominee will have to run in November against a Republican, like in the Lawler district, like in this month's primary in New Jersey. A more centrist Democrat won the primary to run against Tom Kean Jr.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it kind of gets at this age-old question of how do you win a primary where a lot of times the people who are most enthusiastic and energized to vote are the ones to the furthest left or right of your party, depending on which party you're in. And how do you appeal to them and then turn around and appeal to a more centrist audience and try to attract people from the other party to vote for you come November? It's kind of the age-old question. So, yeah, the way you laid it out is exactly right. I mean, you have some districts, particularly the New York City congressional districts, that are certainly going to go in Democratic hands, and the primary ends up basically deciding who wins. And, yeah, you do generally seem to see more left-leaning candidates in those races versus the ones in other parts of the state, in swing districts, particularly Lawler's district, where, you have to have those candidates appeal to a broader audience. So, yeah, there's different factors at play here, different things that voters may want to keep in mind when they head to the polls.
And I think another aspect of this, John, is, and this is interesting because in a way, this is the dog that didn't bark. In other swingy New York districts, different than Lawler's, that is, swingy New York districts currently represented by Democrats, I don't see the more moderate Democratic incumbents getting seriously primaried. Tom Suozzi in Northeast Queens and Nassau's North Shore, not competitive by all accounts. Laura Gillen, same thing on Long Island. Pat Ryan in the Hudson Valley, none of those. But by contrast, Goldman in Brooklyn, Espaillat in Northern Manhattan and the Bronx, arguably both to the left of Suozzi, Gillen, or Ryan to begin with, they're having to defend hard from to the left of them. Does that paradigm make sense to you in a bigger picture view? John?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, it does. I mean, it goes to the question about, is that seat up for grabs in November? So, Espaillat's seat is not going to be a toss-up district, right? It is going to be in Democratic hands. It's in whether it's in his hands or whether it's in Darya-Liza Villa-Chevalier's hands. So right. It is, the calculus is different for those deep blue districts, and the fact that you haven't seen perhaps, further left candidates challenging Tom Suozzi and the other districts that you mentioned there is a recognition of that.
Yeah, we'll probably be talking more about the Suozzi district, the Laura Gillen district, the Pat Ryan district in the fall when they are all expected to have Republican challengers. And Rebecca, to that point, I see you did a story on City and State on Pat Ryan from his perch, up there, Newburgh, New Paltz, Kingston, Poughkeepsie. He has created a political action committee to support moderate Democrats statewide. Your headline is Pat Ryan's Patriot PAC endorses nearly 100 candidates across New York. So what's this Patriot PAC?
So it's actually interesting. He has quite a range of endorsed candidates so far this year. Some of them moderate, some of them more progressive, some of them incumbent, some of them challengers. I think that he really, has been putting himself out there as a potential bridge between these factions of the Democratic Party that we're seeing come to the forefront in a lot of these primary races of the sort of Mamdani left and the more traditional centrist Democratic model. I think that he's really trying to, as I said, be a bridge for that. He pointed out how he will do events and campaign with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, even though they don't always agree on everything. He came out after the 2024 election to impart sort of some of his wisdom as representing a district that is not a guaranteed blue seat, that it's not bad necessarily to shy away from all things progressive, as we started to see from other Democratic people, elected officials, opiners, that perhaps we need to shift away from XYZ issues. I think that he's really trying to position himself to be the person who can parlay these two sides of the party. And I think that's what he's trying to do with the Patriot PAC, which is he was very clear to me that this is not about ideology. It's not about incumbent versus insurgent. It's about who is going to be focused on the issues and deliver for New Yorkers, regardless of where they may fall within this potential and seemingly democratic infighting right now. And like I said, I think for him, he's viewing this as, how can I unify the party at a time when there's a lot of this infighting has become public.
And as we continue to talk about the New York primary, in which early voting starts tomorrow, and take your calls in our first, I say first because I think we'll do a few of these next week too, informal, unofficial, thoroughly unscientific New York primary exit poll, plus your questions for our guest, Rebecca Lewis from City and State, and our Jon Campbell. Jane in Morningside Heights, you're on WNYC. Hello, Jane. Oh, let me do that the right way. Now we have Jane. Hi, Jane. You're on WNYC.
Good morning, Brian. I'm here in New York 13th Congressional District, and I'm going to be voting for Daria-Liza Avila-Chevalier. I've been leaning that way, but ultimately made my decision for sure after listening to both candidates on the forum last week here on the show, and just being particularly disappointed by Espaillat's failure to respond to the really specific and substantive policy points that Daria-Liza brought up. You know, she mentioned half a dozen different bills, and Espaillat didn't address any of them. And you know, at this moment, we need champions for progressive causes coming out of New York.
Jane, thank you very much. And when we come back from a break, I'm going to play a clip of each of them from that candidates forum that we had, where they each kind of really tried not to answer a question I was asking on issues that may be too divisive, positions that they've taken. So we're going to play both of those clips and continue with this informal, unofficial, thoroughly unscientific New York primary exit poll, plus your questions and the analysis from our guest, Rebecca Lewis from City and State, and WNYC and Gothamist Jon Campbell. 212-433-WNYC. Call or text to get in. Brian Lehrer on WNYC with our day before early voting in the New York primary begins segment with Rebecca Lewis from City and State and our Jon Campbell. So yeah, here's another example of left on left from one of our congressional primary forums. This is incumbent Adriano Espaillat being challenged by Daria-Liza Avila-Chevalier in Upper Manhattan and part of the West Bronx. Both candidates tried hard to avoid answering my direct questions on issues that might make them too far in one direction or another for some voters. Here's the Espaillat example first. You may know Avila-Chevalier is very involved in pro-Palestine politics. She was a leader of the Columbia demonstrations. She was at the October 8th, 2023 rally against Israel's strike in Gaza after October 7th. Mahmoud Khalil, who the Trump administration tried to deport after he was a leader of the Columbia protests, Mahmoud Khalil actually called in as a caller to support her during that segment, though we weren't taking candidate surrogate calls, so he didn't get on. But it's an indication of how strongly she feels on that issue and, where some of her support is coming from. But the question for Espaillat was, do you still support U.S.-supplied offensive weapons to Israel, which many congressional Democrats are now moving away from? This clip begins with one of my follow-up questions, and as you'll hear, he didn't really give an answer. Okay, but is that to say you would also continue to support both offensive as well as defensive weapons for Israel?
I will continue to ensure that there is no expansion of the settlements. I will continue to ensure that victims on both sides get humanitarian aid. I will continue to ensure that not one penny goes to the ill-fated Iran war that's being perpetrated by Trump, and I will continue to fight for peace in the region.
So that was Espaillat. I guess we can take that as a yes. He'll continue to vote for military aid, and he was trying not to say that explicitly. And a question for voters is, does he go too far one way, like on that, or does she go too far the other way on Israel-Palestine or on some other things? And so Avila-Chevalier, there's the issue of her social media posts from 2020 and 2021, which took absolutist positions like on defund the police, writing, quote, "It means ending police, full stop, period. No more police at all, ever," unquote. And on immigration, reposting one that said, yes, literally, abolish the border, and that, quote, all deportation is wrong. Now, she says she has grown considerably since those posts. 5 and 6 years ago, she said that in multiple forums, including ours. So I tried to find out how much she has changed from the one that said all deportation is wrong. Here's a minute of that exchange.
I do believe that deportation is wrong. And I believe that because it is about punishing people on the basis of where they were born.
All deportation,
and that is not something that we do.
All deportation, including of people who came here illegally and committed violent acts? Just trying to see where the line is based on your previous position.
We have a criminal justice system, that exists. It is imperfect, but it exists. And the fact that we subject people who are both born here and those who aren't to that, and then differentiate when it comes to that after they've faced that criminal system, and place them into immigration detention and subject them to deportation, right, on the basis of where they were born, is deeply discriminatory, right? Folks who have already gone through a criminal system, who have paid their debt to society, who for so many are just trying to restabilize themselves and be back in their communities, that they are subjected to a form of punishment that people who were born here are not subjected to, is a violation of a principle of equality for everyone, regardless of where they were born.
So, again, listeners, you may agree or disagree with her on that position, which still seems like no deportation ever, even for people convicted of violent crimes and who have served time for that and were here illegally at the time of their criminal activity. Or you may agree or disagree with Espaillat on apparently still send bombs to Israel. But overall, Jon, these are two progressive politicians. If you look down 95% of the stance that they take on everything else, but this is what the debate looks like in reliably Democratic districts. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, and it goes to show just how much the politics of Israel has changed, or at least the politics of candidates and their positions on Israel. New York City has a large Jewish population, and for a long time the conventional wisdom was you have to have a very pro-Israel stance to get elected in New York City, and that has changed over time with Israel's actions in the war in Gaza, and it has look no further than the mayoral race last year when Zoran Mamdani, who has been outspoken in his pro-Palestinian stances, was elected over Andrew Cuomo, who had a traditional pro-Israel stance over the course of his career. So, it is just one other example, one of many examples of the way that the New York City electorate has continued to shift to the left, and that will be tested in New York 13 for sure, where one of the big issues that they disagree on is the exact issue that you laid out there in your question to Adriano Espaillat.
All right. Now, we're actually going to move on from the congressional primaries because there are also some primaries and races other than for Congress that aren't getting as much press. They are, for New York State offices. Governor Hochul is running for re-election unchallenged in the primaries, but longtime New York State comptroller Tom DiNapoli is having to defend. I'm not sure how competitive or if there's been polling, but Rebecca, the New York Times wrote it up this way, quote, "Two newcomers are running to the left of Mr. DiNapoli, 72, trying to define him as the candidate of the establishment who has served well past his expiration date. The candidates, Raj Goyal and Drew Warshaw, have sought to emulate the energy and enthusiasm that Mayor Zoran Mamdani generated in his winning campaign," unquote from the Times. So what can you tell us about either of those challengers, and if you can tell if DiNapoli is in any trouble?
It's an interesting race, and it did originally start out with three candidates challenging DiNapoli before Adam Bunkadeko was kicked off the ballot because of issues with his petition signatures. And it's really quite a competitive and messy race. And I think it is to DiNapoli's benefit that the more people trying to run to his left, the better his chances are. But this very much is, whether it was Drew Warshaw, Raj Goyal, or before he was off the ballot, Adam Bunkadeko, every one of them was trying to establish themselves as the progressive candidate of the moment. And that was one of the reasons why there was a lot of attention around what the Working Families Party was going to do. An endorsement from the progressive third party would have been a huge validation for any of the challengers. And it was also notable for the party not to endorse DiNapoli after supporting him in the past and given his extensive union support. But the Working Families Party decided to stay out of it. So now you have Drew Warshaw and Raj Goyal both trying to establish themselves as a progressive alternative for a seat that, frankly, your average New Yorker probably doesn't know a ton about. If you were to ask an average New Yorker, even one who's very plugged in, what does the state comptroller do? They probably wouldn't be able to tell you too much other than perhaps he watches over the state's finances. So the two challengers also have the struggle of trying to get voters excited about a position that hasn't had a competitive race, let alone a Democratic primary for almost 2 decades. So, it's an uphill challenge for them. I personally haven't seen any definitive polling in this race, but I think it remains Tom DiNapoli's race to lose. He has almost 2 decades of experience in the role, and it's a tough position to try to sell to the voters when it's, your job is running the state pension fund and auditing state agencies and whatnot. It's not very exciting when you first come across it. So it's an uphill challenge, certainly, for both of them.
We have a caller backing one of those challenges. So let's see what Lee in Bed-Stuy has to say. Hi, Lee. You're on WNYC.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, great. Hey, I was calling in for Drew Warshaw. I got to meet him recently at a fundraiser. I really like that he wanted to audit Con Ed. I feel like my Con Ed bills are out of control, and I would love for that to happen. He also, as they were saying, is overseeing a lot of the finances and wanted to make sure, that we were invested in things that align, to the left with climate change, and making sure we're addressing the affordability crisis. So I was just really impressed with him. And he made a really good case against the incumbent that he was not, with stock markets reaching ultimate highs recently, that our investments were not keeping up with sort of the status quo there.
Lee, thank you very much. All right, so there's one for Drew Warshaw. John, interesting caller, who cited both that the pension fund's growth may not be keeping up with overall stock market growth, and that they're not making political decisions enough to invest, consistent with the values that she and Drew Warshaw says he represents. And she brought up auditing Con Ed. So, an interesting array of issues there. Do you want to add anything, or do you know if this auditing Con Ed issue is an issue, or if Tom DiNapoli actually isn't auditing Con Ed, which of course is state regulated and the state can control the rates. So what'd you think?
Well, I think the pension fund issues in particular are paramount, right? Because that is the biggest responsibility of the state comptroller's office, to manage that roughly $300 billion pension fund that pays out retirement benefits to thousands upon thousands of not just state workers, but municipal workers as well across the state. And what that pension fund is invested in is always kind of a source of debate, and it has become a source of debate in this primary. Now, there's the question of is the comptroller's responsibility to invest in things that make as much money as possible, or is there a social responsibility as well to invest in things like that combat climate change, et cetera, et cetera. Drew Warshaw has brought up the idea of investing in affordable housing, while some of the critics of that would say, well, maybe that's not a great investment for the plan. And the better the pension fund does, the less local governments and ultimately taxpayers pay into it, or have to pay to keep it afloat. So, in general, the Comptroller DiNapoli likes to tout the fact that the plan is fully funded, meaning it has the money to pay out to all of its retirees. Drew Warshaw likes to point out, and Raj Goyal like to point out that is a requirement of the law. But the pension fund in particular is what is the biggest responsibility. Managing that pension fund is the biggest responsibility of the Comptroller's Office. In terms of Con Ed, there would be some opportunity to audit, say, rate increases at the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission is an entity of the Hochul administration and has to approve any rate increases. That would be primarily where the comptroller would get involved, and that has been a criticism of his opponent, Mr. Warshaw, that he has not perhaps sufficiently got involved in utility rate audits.
And as we discuss the New York primaries, in which early voting begins tomorrow, there are various state legislature primaries. Rebecca, I see your colleagues at City and State have an article about 10 DSA endorsements, and I'm going to read a little of this for our listeners. For example, it says 4 of those DSA candidates are challenging incumbent assembly members. David Orkin, who's going after Assemblymember Jennifer Rajkumar in Queens. Celeste Tate, challenging Assemblymember Eric Dillon in North Brooklyn. Ian Huntley, challenging Assemblymember Stefani Zinnerman in Bed-Stuy. And Conrad Blackburn, challenging Assemblymember Jordan Wright in Harlem. Now, very few people relatively get their minds around state assembly primaries, but are there defining issues for state legislature candidates, DSA versus the incumbents, either side of that's getting the DSA involved, on these 10 candidates as a group?
This is a very wide slate for the DSA, and I think it's more to do with the growing power of the DSA in New York City and the resources at their disposal to support more candidates. I think that the fact that I think that Mamdani's success last year really lit a fire under DSA organizers. Some of these races are not new. Some of these candidates, like Ian Huntley, had previously run. And there's been mixed success for DSA candidates running against moderate incumbents. DSA candidates running against moderate incumbents. And I think that there is a sense that this year they will see perhaps the greatest level of success that they've ever had. I think that in many of these cases, there are obviously hyper-local issues that are going to come into play, but I think that it ultimately comes down to the usual, which is there are moderate, more traditional Democrats, incumbents in areas of the city that are becoming increasingly progressive, that DSA is increasingly getting footholds in. And we're now even seeing them start to branch out, which, to use the New York 13th congressional race as an example, DSA hasn't traditionally had a foothold in Upper Manhattan, but they're starting to branch out. So I think that the wide DSA slate for the legislative races this year is just a testament to the fact that they are able to flex their power in a way that they've never had before. They have more resources, more support, and a mayor to back at least some of the candidates. The mayor endorsed some of the slate. Representative Ocasio Cortez endorsed some of the other parts of the slate. But either way, it's a confluence of power and influence that the organization has never had. So they're really starting to pour their resources into districts and races that they feel that they can win and have incumbents who are vulnerable.
Here's one example on the phones. We have Shinawa in Ridgewood, who I think is calling to support DSA-endorsed David Orkin over the incumbent Jennifer Rajkumar. Shinawa, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Hi, nice to talk to you. Yes, I'm here to endorse David Orkin. I have lived in Ridgewood for about 15 years. And unfortunately, it was brought to my attention that Raj Kumar her campaign illegally signed my name on her reelection petition. And that really made me want to seek out another candidate in this election to be behind. And David Orkin has been somebody that is, I'm really excited about his campaign platform and everything that he stands for.
So is there an issue, and I'll ask you, John, in a minute about whether Raj Kumar really did forge petition signatures, if she's been, if that's been determined to have actually happened. But are there state legislator issues, Shanoa, that you would identify that separate the two for you?
There's a lot of the same, they definitely have a lot of the same platform, affordability in New York. But it's just about going a little bit deeper into the issues of it and wanting to get to the roots of what tenant rights and freeze rents, just things that really can help everyday people to make their lives more affordable and more manageable.
Thank you for your call. We really appreciate that. John, do you know anything about that alleged signature forging?
Yeah, that was a matter of ballot petition signatures. You have to get X amount of signatures from voters within your district, Democratic voters, if you're running in a Democratic primary, to appear on the ballot. There were many questions about some of the names and apparent signatures that appeared on Jennifer Rajkumar's ballot petitions, including the caller, as she just laid out. And that did go to court. David Orkin attorneys for David Orkin and his supporters brought a case to try to get Jennifer Rajkumar, the incumbent assembly member, tossed off the ballot because of those questions about fraudulent signatures. But that case was tossed. It was tossed it was tossed on procedural grounds. So it never got to the question of whether the petitions or the signatures were valid or not. So yeah, that is a legitimate issue, but it was taken to court and was thrown on a procedural grounds.
And before we run out of time, just one more indication, Rebecca, from something on City and State of how complicated these politics are. They're not just pure. In the mayor's case, or in probably anybody's case, but in the mayor's case that we're going to discuss, just pure who do you prefer, because as that City and State article says, the mayor refrained from endorsing any assembly challengers. In other words, any of these people like Orkin versus Rajkumar, who are going up against Assembly Democratic incumbents in order to avoid antagonizing Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie, who fought for some of Mamdani's priorities during budget negotiations and doesn't like it when his members face primary challenges. That was first reported by Hellgate. Right, that shows some of the political complexities where it's not just about who do you like.
Certainly. I mean, these are also some of Mamdani's former colleagues, and he's had some relationships with members that might have surprised onlookers just based purely on politics. Now, certainly we've seen that the mayor is not shy about endorsing candidates in tricky races, regardless of past alleged or supposed agreements. But it's a little bit tougher when it is members that you serve with, when you have someone like Speaker Hastie who you need on your side or is helpful to have on your side when you're fighting for budget priorities from the state. So it certainly is very tricky. And even beyond just, the DSA aspect of it all, there are other races where the DSA isn't even directly involved that are for open seats or, for races that aren't directly DSA endorsed that are also up in the air. There's so many to talk about, but the political calculations, whether from the mayor, from members of Congress or otherwise, are immense this year around.
Folks, we'll keep covering the primary as the voting continues. Early voting begins tomorrow and runs through next Sunday. Then primary day itself is Tuesday, June 23rd. Jon Campbell, Rebecca Lewis, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.